New rankings put Texas at the top when it comes to the best place for business.
People are coming to the state of Texas more than any other state, and that's people and companies.
But despite the good news, there's cause for concern. Why some worry moves from the White House could put the boom in jeopardy. Another big surprise in the battle to represent you in the U.S. Senate. Beto O'Rourke takes fundraising to a new level. But will the cash be enough to help him catch Ted Cruz in the polls?
It just needs to be regulated. And that's where the problem lies. It's not regulated properly.
Predatory booting. Before the state says goodbye to the current system, we check to see who's going to protect drivers now. Hello, and thank you for joining us for State of Texas. I'm Josh Hinkle. This past week brought a run of good economic news for the Lone Star State. CNBC put Texas at the top of its annual list ranking the best states for business. The study looks at 10 categories, including workforce, infrastructure, and quality of life. Those factors help the state win the battle to become home to the Army's newest headquarters. Austin beat out several other cities to become the location for the Army's new Futures Command. The headquarters will oversee the development of new missiles, tanks, and aircraft for modern warfare. It will be home to about 500 active duty and civilian staffers, but the headquarters could also likely lure major defense contractors to open offices nearby. Also this week, a surge in oil prices is boosting the state budget. State Comptroller Glenn Hager cited rising oil prices as one of the reasons he's raising the state's revenue estimate by nearly $3 billion. That's good because Texas lawmakers face a list of big expenses when they convene in January. Bills remain from Hurricane Harvey and from Medicaid, which lawmakers underfunded by more than $2 billion. And there's also an expensive push to improve school security after the deadly shootings in Santa Fe. But the comptroller warned that two things could darken the brighter budget outlook before January. The first, a trade war. This week, the Trump administration released a $200 billion list of goods that could be hit with 10% tariffs. China promised to retaliate. The second concern is the possibility of the U.S. withdrawing from NAFTA. Lawmakers in Washington are hearing the concerns from Texans.
I do hear quite a bit from my Texas constituents on NAFTA. They're concerned about the delay in getting that resolved, the modernization of NAFTA that supports about 5 million American jobs, the trade with Mexico alone, 8 million with Canada. So the delay in getting NAFTA redone or updated, I think is a better way to say it, has caused some concern about what ultimately is going to happen. And then the tariffs on aluminum and steel, as we know, the retaliatory tariffs that have been imposed have been directed toward agriculture. And so yesterday I had in my office representatives of the Texas Farm Bureau expressing their concerns about what this might mean in terms of the commodity prices of the things that they grow on their farms.
Despite the uncertainty over the trade war and NAFTA, the Texas Comptroller raised the state's revenue estimate. Joining us now for perspective is Tom Cura, the state's chief revenue estimator. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So what is the revenue estimate and how do you forecast that number?
Well, the revenue estimate is something that's required by state constitution for the Comptroller to provide to the legislature. And the one most people are familiar with, I think, around the Capitol is what we call our biennial revenue estimate. So when the legislature comes to town, we have to tell them before they start meeting, and then we typically do this the day before the legislature convenes. We tell the legislature how much money they have to spend. So when the legislature finishes their work, and a couple months later the state's fiscal year and that current biennium finish, we'll do what's called a certification revenue estimate, and that is an update of that biennial revenue estimate to take account of anything that the legislature did that affected revenues and to make any adjustments we might need because in the case that economic conditions have changed since that January estimate. The most recent certification revenue estimate we released was in October of 2017, but things have been the state's economy has been performing better than we expected, and that's translated into revenues running ahead of our projection from October. So as we kind of looked at things for this summer for some other things we have to do in the office, the Comptroller decided, look, things are running far enough ahead estimate, it might make sense to go ahead and do an updated estimate this summer.
You mentioned lawmakers. They've got to be happy that they've got some more money to work with. In an election year, does politics ever play into the way that you guys are making your decisions?
No, we sort of stay isolated from that. We're just looking at the numbers, looking at how the economy's doing. We track our revenues on a monthly basis, so it doesn't really play much of a role there.
When you have fluctuating oil prices or even like the trade war, I mean, how does that help you or hurt you when you're weighing what's happening with the state?
Well, one of the reasons we're updating this estimate this summer is because oil prices and oil production in Texas have run well ahead of what we forecast back in October. We had projected oil prices to be in the 50s. They've gone up into the 70s. So our revenue from the oil production tax has been well ahead of estimate, but it's also meant our sales tax is running ahead of estimate, and that's tied to oil prices are higher than we thought they would be. Also, the U.S. economy is doing a little bit better than we thought, and that helps drag the Texas economy along too. In addition to those rising oil prices that help the Texas economy. So yeah, that's one of the main reasons we did this estimate, because things have been performing so well in Texas.
With higher oil prices, it might mean more revenue, but it also hits Texans when we're talking about their wallet at the gas pump. So how does that play into everything? Right.
So that can have a small offsetting effect. So we're collecting more revenue from severance taxes and from sales taxes, particularly from businesses in that industry who are buying equipment they have to pay sales tax on. But yeah, if consumers have less money in their pocket because they're paying more at the pump for gasoline, then they might spend a little bit less on things that are subject to the sales tax. So it can have a little bit of an offset there.
I appreciate you explaining it to us. It's a complicated subject.
Yes, it is.
Thank you very much.
You bet.
The hard left, they're energized, they're angry, and they hate the president. And they're raising tens of millions of dollars.
Another big surprise in the battle to represent you in the U.S. Senate. Beto O'Rourke takes fundraising to a new level, but will the cash be enough to help him catch Ted Cruz in the polls? And how will this big money battle affect other races on the November ballot?
It's really a free-for-all anywhere outside. You go to Bastrop, you can go to St. Marcus, you can go anywhere right now, boot. There's no law.
A big change is on the horizon when it comes to companies booting drivers who parked in the wrong spot. Soon, the state will have no control, so who's looking out for you when it comes to stopping predatory booting practices? No law, no oversight. If cities don't have booting regulations in place by September, drivers could be in trouble. Texas lawmakers have deregulated booting because the state has not been doing much enforcement. They want to instead give cities that authority. We've discovered time is ticking away for local leaders to take action. We know Austin is considering its plan right now, but reaching out to a dozen surrounding cities, our Kylie McGivern found many aren't even aware it will soon be up to them to make sure private booting companies can't charge you whatever they want.
Drive through West Campus and you'll likely miss it. The parking lot Sean calls a gold mine for people booting.
It's a quick $150 per minute, it seems like. So these companies are making a gross amount of money.
Look a little closer on West 24th and you'll see the warnings. Don't park next door, not even for 10 seconds. And you know what?
I think it's obscene.
That's about all it took for Sean's daughter to get a boot on her car, she said, when she thought this parking lot also covered this building.
And as soon as my daughter walked away and they were standing in front of her car, they put it on her car.
Sean asked that we only use her first name to help protect her identity from those booting. People, she says, should be required to present an ID.
The police department, their hands are tied apparently, and no one's doing anything about it. These companies are just rogue.
Right now, it's the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation that oversees booting companies, at least the ones they're aware of, like Central Towing, a company Joe Santiago took over at the beginning of the year, the same company, it turns out, that booted Sean's daughter.
As we're talking about this, you're probably not everyone's favorite person. You run a booting company. Why are you willing to sit down and talk about this?
Because someone needs to talk about it and get in front of it. Someone needs to defend the businesses that need the parking spaces. It just needs to be regulated, and that's where the problem lies. It's not regulated properly.
For one, he says, there needs to be more signage for customers.
If you really want to protect them, then put a sign that says exactly who the parking is for And what is going to happen? Your car is going to get booed or towed immediately. You know, the fee, and it should be a different sign than the towing sign.
Beyond that, the city wants to make booting operators clearly identifiable in any given lot, lower and cap booting fees.
So if you're driving a Mercedes or a Range Rover and I want to charge you $500, I can. If I want to charge you $20, I can.
And implement background checks.
Just like you do with the tow drivers, you want to make sure that when somebody represents or you're dealing with somebody, you don't have to worry about their past history.
With that, Commander Eric Meese knows a greater workload will fall to his department.
We're just going to reassign some people to try to help get all the background checks done.
Though booting complaint numbers filed against the state have been low, we found disciplinary action taken against booting and towing companies is up across Texas, from 225 cases in 2015 to 370 last year. Work Austin will now take on as Sean takes her concerns to city leaders.
What they're doing is just so unethical to me. They should wear uniforms. And if they're right there where the car is parking, they should be required to give some kind of notification.
Kylie McGivern joins us now. You were at the Austin Urban Transportation Commission meeting, and I think that a lot of cities, after seeing that plan, might be wondering, how do we implement this at our place?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, since we started talking with APD about state oversight going away, they tell us officials from Pflugerville and even Fort Worth have reached out to see what Austin plans to get in place. The main factors are police want booting operators to be clearly identifiable and carry a city-issued ID. They want them to go through a criminal background check, just like tow truck operators, and cap booting fees at $50.
So if a city does have a lower booting fee like that, instead of what the state now has at a $150 cap, how might businesses react to that?
Well, one company that we spoke with said it would kill their business. So the concern is that a low fee could incentivize towing and push booting businesses to surrounding areas like Pflugerville, Round Rock, Buda, places where right now there's no regulation in place.
So with Austin's proposed cap, how does that compare to the rest of the states that have their own caps right now?
Well, we learned a little bit more about that at the meeting. So right now, APD tells us there are only 3 cities that have their own booting regulations. That's outside of the state oversight. In Dallas, the cap is $100, but in San Antonio, it's $35, and in Houston, it's just $25.
Good to know. Thank you, Kylie. State lawmakers now require all new police cadets to get mental health crisis training. Now that curriculum is in place, and we're getting an up-close look at how it works to help keep you safe. The big money battle to represent you in Washington just reached a new level. Beto O'Rourke hits records when it comes to fundraising, and all the campaign cash could have an impact beyond his race with Ted Cruz in November. You're watching State of Texas. When Ted Cruz ran for Senate in 2012, he spent more than $14 million on his campaign. Democrat Paul Sadler spent just $500,000. Cruz won by double digits. But this year will be different, at least when it comes to money. Senator Cruz does not have a huge fundraising advantage over Democrat Beto O'Rourke. This week, the Cruz campaign announced he took in $4.6 million over the past 3 months. That's up from the previous quarter, but it's less than half the fundraising haul for O'Rourke's campaign. He brought in more than $10 million in donations. That's his biggest total so far. O'Rourke says he will not take PAC money, relying instead on individual donations. That's not normal for a major campaign. Still, the fundraising strategy seems to be paying off. After this last quarter, O'Rourke moved ahead of Cruz in the money race. Cruz has more than $10 million cash on hand. O'Rourke has $14 million, but he's still behind in the polls. A recent University of Texas Tribune poll showed Cruz with a 5-point lead over O'Rourke. Other polls show the Democrat trailing by double digits. Let's turn to our panel for perspective. James Berrigan covers Texas government for the Dallas Morning News, and Patrick Svitek reports on politics for the Texas Tribune. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So how important are these numbers right now?
I think they're impressive. I think they're important for Beto O'Rourke. Obviously, raising $10 million is impressive, and I think he's got $14 million cash on hand. But I think what's really important for him is what he does next with it. I think we've got to I'm going to be the person that pours some cold water on this and say, let's slow down and see what happens next. We've got to remember that Texas hasn't elected a statewide official as a Democrat since 1994. So it's going to be really important for him is to see what he does with that money.
Oh, I agree with James. It's a very impressive number, but we're moving toward the part of the campaign where the fundraising isn't so much as important as how it's being spent and allocated. Because we have 4 months until Election Day. And so I think a lot of reporters now, will be focusing very closely on how this money is being spent and what it's going toward, because Beto O'Rourke still has this problem that he's not really well known statewide. And you have a few options going forward to solve that problem. One of them is to air TV ads, which he's been somewhat ambivalent about and hasn't necessarily committed to, or at least committed to doing as much as previous candidates have. And so I'll be watching very closely to see how that money is spent.
Mm-hmm. And he's done a good job so far of doing the Facebook Lives, to going to the little cafes in red counties, getting those small amounts and small crowds that really have gotten him those national headlines of Beto will go anywhere. Beto's going to Facebook Live every single thing. But really, it goes to Patrick's point of can he get that money and make that money work for him in terms of statewide campaigns or campaigns for TV in big markets where he maybe isn't so recognizable. And that's going to be tough because he's promised not to take PAC money.
Right, yeah, he's promised not to take PAC money. He hasn't reached out to the DNC. He's not working with political consultants. What's the strategy there?
Patrick?
I think it's something that, he is trying to run what he views as kind of the most clean, ethical campaign. And I think it resonates with a lot of his supporters. They at least like the no PAC money pledge. I don't run into too many people who are excited that he has no consultants or no pollsters. I think maybe they'd like a little more assurances there. But I think the no PAC money, it goes to the kind of campaign that he's envisioned. And it's certainly something that I think his supporters appreciate.
And in all seriousness, I think he is trying to run a very different campaign from other Democrats. As opposed to other Democrats who have gone out and have gone to the far left on the whole abolish ICE movement, he's been very careful about his statements around that issue, also around issues like DACA and immigration. While he obviously, I think, prefers that there is a path for citizenship for Dreamers, he really prefers that Congress takes care of that, which is something that could appeal to a broader base outside of just Democrats.
We know this week Lupe Valdez and Greg Abbott, they agreed to a gubernatorial debate on September 28th with our Nexstar stations. I wonder, how does the O'Rourke and the Cruz effect really impact races like that and other races down the ballot?
I think from the beginning, politicos and experts have called the Cruz-O'Rourke race the marquee race. I think Valdez joining the fray and her being the candidate against Governor Abbott has really gotten a little bit more attention. But even at the Democratic Convention in Fort Worth, Beto O'Rourke was the headliner and she was kind of second. So it's kind of interesting. And I'm not sure how they're going to work together or whether they help or hurt. And I think there's been conversation even amongst them about how they're going to work together. So
yeah, I'd argue that the most important fundraising report of this season is actually Greg Abbott's, because you have a lot of Republican statewide officials who are going to be a little farther down the ballot who are looking up at Greg Abbott to basically carry everyone across the finish line. So some of these statewides, like Ted Cruz, maybe it's a little closer than usual. Maybe they have some unique problems in their race. But I think Greg Abbott is going to be, just with his $40 million plus turnout machine, political machine, whatever you want to call it, is going to be someone who's going to be able to carry all these, have the resources to turn out the vote up and down the ballot and carry a lot of these people across the finish line. I'm sure they'll do well on their own, but he'll be there to kind of reinforce the ticket.
Patrick, James, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our investigation revealed police agencies in Texas severely lacked training when it comes to officers encountering someone suffering a mental health crisis. After our report, Texas lawmakers passed new training requirements. Now we're seeing how the changes are making a difference. After a sniper killed 5 police officers in downtown Dallas in July 2016, our investigative team explored common factors that led up to police shootings. Our Fallen report found since 2000, in a third of all cases where a Texas police officer was shot and killed, the killers had a history of mental illness. We also revealed police agencies in Texas severely lacked training when it comes to officers encountering someone suffering a mental health crisis, which can be very dangerous for that person, the officer, and the public. After our report, the Texas legislature passed a measure to require mental health officer training for all new cadets statewide. The law requires that cadets receive a full 40 hours of crisis intervention training. The Texas Commission on Law Enforcement has rolled out that new curriculum. Steffi Lee takes an inside look at the training.
Focus on me.
Okay.
Focus on me.
But he's so
you hear what I'm saying, right?
This role playing at the Travis County Sheriff's Office Training Academy highlights what an officer could face.
I just need you to get rid of this demon
when dealing with someone experiencing a mental health crisis.
A lot of times people commit crimes when they're in a mental health crisis and have no idea that they're committing a crime.
And that's why I called you, because I don't want to hurt anybody.
The Travis County Sheriff's Office and mental health partners provided 40 hours of free training to officers over the last 4 days.
Building rapport, really joining and engaging with that individual.
They learned about available resources, like a local 24-hour mobile crisis outreach team.
I'm going to keep you safe, okay? And make sure nothing happens to you.
Out of 26 in the class, 6 were school resource officers.
Bringing in our mental health expertise to focus on specific issues related to children and adolescents, diagnosis, medication issues, risk factors, suicide intervention, and de-escalation techniques as well.
And a key component in any scenario is knowing the proper communication tone.
Is there any way to deal with this mental health crisis that doesn't require someone being arrested?
Steffi Lee for State of Texas.
We've also learned several law enforcement agencies, including Austin Police, have started showing our fallen investigation during in-house sessions to give cadets a sense of the risk without that mental health training. Thank you again for joining us for State of Texas. I'm Josh Hinkle. We'll be back next week to bring you an in-depth look at Texas politics.